Every wild animal knows one simple rule: stay away from humans. And honestly, that's a pretty smart rule. We've hunted animals for thousands of years. We've destroyed forests, polluted oceans, and filled the wild with traps, fences, fishing nets, and roads. If there's one species that wild animals should never trust, it's us. But every once in a while, something happens that completely breaks that rule. A wild dolphin swims straight toward a diver instead of away. An injured elephant walks up to a rescue truck. A fox with its head stuck inside a glass jar approaches a group of strangers and doesn't run. These animals aren't pets. They've never been trained. Most of them have spent their entire lives avoiding people. So why would they suddenly do the exact opposite? Are they simply out of options? Do they somehow recognize that humans can help? Or are we misunderstanding what we're actually seeing? Because the answer is far more complicated than it first appears. And it takes us into one of the strangest questions in animal behavior. Can a wild animal decide that the most dangerous creature on Earth is also its best chance of survival? One of the best known examples happened off the coast of Hawaii. A group of scuba divers was exploring the reef when something unusual appeared in the distance. It was a wild bottlenose dolphin. At first, nothing seemed strange. But instead of swimming away like wild dolphins normally do, it kept circling the group. Then, it came even closer. The dolphin wasn't playing, it wasn't looking for food, it wasn't curious. Something was clearly wrong. The divers noticed that it was swimming awkwardly, almost as if every movement was painful. One diver, marine naturalist Keller Laros, looked more carefully. That's when he saw it. A fishing hook was stuck deep inside the dolphin's mouth. Fishing line was wrapped tightly around one of its fins and stretched across part of its body. Every time the dolphin moved, the line pulled tighter. A wild dolphin is easily powerful enough to injure a human. One strong hit from its tail could break bones. Instead, and the animal did something almost impossible to explain. It stopped moving. It stayed close. It allowed a complete stranger to reach into its mouth and carefully remove the hook. Then, the fishing line was cut away. Only after everything was gone did the dolphin finally swim off. For many people, this looked like an incredible act of trust. But scientists see something even more interesting. The real mystery isn't that the dolphin was rescued. The mystery is why it approached humans in the first place. Out in the open ocean, it had countless directions. It could have swum. Yet somehow, it chose the one direction that brought it to the only creatures capable of solving its problem. Was that just luck? Or was it a decision easy to dismiss? Maybe it was confused. Maybe it was exhausted. Maybe it was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. But the strange part is, it wasn't the only one. In December 2005, a rescue team received a call about a humpback whale trapped off the coast of California. When they arrived, the situation looked hopeless. The whale had become tangled in dozens of heavy crab lines. Hundreds of pounds of fishing gear were dragging behind its body. One of its flippers was wrapped so tightly that the rope had already started cutting into the skin. Every dive became harder. Every breath required enormous effort. Rescuers entered the water with small, curved knives. For nearly an hour, they worked underneath an animal that weighed around 40 tons. At any moment, one powerful movement could have seriously injured or even killed everyone in the water. But that never happened. The whale stayed almost completely still. It didn't thrash. It didn't panic. It simply floated, while the rescuers cut away one rope after another. Eventually, the final line came free. The whale was finally able to swim again. And then, something unexpected happened. Instead of disappearing into the open ocean, it slowly circled back. Witnesses said it approached each diver one by one, gently touching them with its head, before swimming away. No one knows what that behavior meant. Scientists are careful not to call it gratitude. Animals don't always think the way humans do, but one fact is impossible to ignore. For nearly an hour, one of the largest predators in the ocean chose not to fight the people surrounding it. And this wasn't the last time researchers would see something like this. Over the years, dolphins, manta rays, seals, elephants, foxes, and even birds have all been documented approaching humans under remarkably similar circumstances. Different species, different continents. The same impossible question. Why? By now you might be thinking these are just incredible coincidences. A dolphin, a whale, two unusual stories. But researchers have documented similar encounters all over the world. In parts of Africa, wildlife veterinarians have reported injured elephants approaching rescue vehicles instead of running away. Some carried snare wounds. Others had arrows lodged deep in their bodies. After encounters with poachers, instead of disappearing into the bush, they slowed down and waited, while veterinarians prepared tranquilizer darts and medical equipment. Then, there are manta rays. Divers have occasionally found them hovering almost motionless, with fishing hooks stuck inside their mouths, or lines wrapped around their wings. Normally, manta rays avoid close contact with people, but in these rare moments, some stayed close long enough for divers to remove the hooks. Even smaller animals have shown surprisingly similar behavior. In Russia, a wild fox wandered into a village with its head trapped inside a glass jar. Instead of fleeing from nearby people, it stopped only a few feet away. One man carefully pulled the jar free, and the fox immediately ran back into the forest. Then, there are honey-guide birds in Africa. Unlike the other animals we've talked about, these birds aren't asking for rescue. They're asking for cooperation. For generations, they've learned to lead humans to hidden beehives. The people collect the honey, the birds eat the leftover wax and larvae. It's one of the few scientifically confirmed examples of wild animals intentionally working with humans for mutual benefit. These stories happened in different countries. They involved different species. Some lived in the ocean, others lived in forests or on open savannas. Yet they all share one strange detail. At the exact moment when survival was on the line, they moved toward the one animal they had every reason to fear. And that's where the real mystery begins. Because understanding what happened is easy. Understanding why it happened is much harder. Much. So, do wild animals actually know that humans can help them? The honest answer is, we don't know. And that's exactly why scientists find these encounters so fascinating. The first thing researchers point out is that we need to be careful. Humans are incredibly good at telling stories. When a whale swims back toward the divers who freed it, we naturally think it was saying thank you. When an elephant approaches a rescue vehicle, we imagine it was asking for help. But animals don't think in words, and they don't experience the world the way we do. That's why scientists try to separate what we observed from what we believe it meant. So what do the observations actually tell us? The most widely accepted explanation is surprisingly simple. Animals learn from patterns. Behavioral scientists call this associative learning. Imagine an animal that has spent hours trapped in fishing line. Every movement causes pain. Every attempt to escape makes the ropes tighter. Eventually something changes. Instead of asking, is that human dangerous? its brain begins asking a different question. Is doing nothing even more dangerous? At that point, the normal fear response can break down. The risk of approaching a human suddenly becomes smaller than the risk of staying trapped. In other words, the animal isn't choosing humans because it trusts us. It's choosing the option that offers the highest chance of survival. But that explanation doesn't answer every case. Some elephants have approached the same type of veterinary vehicles that treated them years earlier. Honey-guide birds don't just tolerate humans, they actively recruit them to find beehives, and dolphins have repeatedly remained calm while complete strangers removed hooks and fishing line from their bodies. These behaviors suggest something more than panic, not necessarily an understanding of human kindness, but perhaps an understanding that humans can sometimes change an outcome. That's an important difference. Scientists believe that highly intelligent species such as elephants, dolphins, whales, and certain birds may be capable of making flexible decisions when familiar instincts stop working. Rather than following a single rule like avoid humans at all costs, they may be able to weigh two competing risks. One path is familiar, but likely fatal. The other is unfamiliar, but offers a small chance of survival. And every once in a while, that tiny chance is enough to override millions of years of instinct, which leads to an even bigger question. Why do these stories almost always involve the same handful of species and almost never the rest of the animal kingdom? Here's something even stranger. These stories don't happen evenly across the animal kingdom. You almost never hear about an injured rabbit walking up to a human, or a wild antelope waiting for someone to remove a thorn. Instead, the same names appear over and over again. Elephants, dolphins, whales, ravens, sometimes seals, occasionally great apes. At first, that might seem like a coincidence, but researchers don't think it is. These species share several remarkable traits. They live for decades, not just a few years. They remember places and individuals over incredibly long periods of time. They build complex social relationships that can last an entire lifetime. And perhaps most importantly, they constantly learn from experience. An elephant doesn't simply react to the world, it remembers it. A dolphin doesn't rely only on instinct. It spends its life solving problems, communicating with its pod, and adapting to new situations. A raven can recognize individual human faces years after a single encounter. These are animals with brains built for flexibility. That flexibility may be the key. Most wild animals survive because they follow simple rules, run from predators, avoid anything unfamiliar, never take unnecessary risks. Those rules work incredibly well and most of the time. But highly intelligent animals don't always rely on fixed rules. Sometimes they make exceptions. Not because they're fearless, but because they're capable of recognizing when the usual rule is no longer the best one. In other words, intelligence doesn't replace instinct. It gives an animal the ability to question it. And that may explain why these extraordinary encounters are so rare, because they don't happen when an animal is simply scared. They happen when instinct fails and intelligence takes over. But even that isn't the whole story. There's one uncomfortable fact that prevents scientists from drawing a simple conclusion. As convincing as these stories are, scientists are careful not to jump to conclusions, because there's one important fact that's easy to forget. For every whale that was successfully rescued, for every dolphin that approached a diver, for every elephant that found its way to a rescue team, there were probably thousands of other animals that never came near a human at all. They remained trapped. They stayed hidden. And many of them simply didn't survive. Those animals don't become headlines. we never hear their stories. That creates a powerful illusion. When the rare success stories are shared millions of times online, it's easy to believe this behavior is common. In reality, when it's anything but, these encounters are extraordinary precisely because they're so rare. There's another challenge too. Humans are natural storytellers. Our brains are wired to see intention in the behavior of others. If a whale gently touches a diver after being freed, we instinctively describe it as gratitude. If a fox pauses before running back into the forest, we call it a thank you. But science asks a different question. How do we know that's what the animal intended? The truthful answer is we don't. A whale may simply be investigating the divers after the ropes were removed. A dolphin may stay close because it's exhausted, not because it trusts the people around it. Even an elephant approaching a rescue vehicle may be responding to years of learned experience rather than making a conscious request for help. The behavior is real. The interpretation is where scientists become cautious, and that's what makes this topic so fascinating. The evidence shows that these encounters happen. It does not tell us exactly what was happening inside the animal's mind, until we can somehow experience the world through a whale's senses, or understand the thoughts of an elephant. Part of this mystery will always remain unanswered. But perhaps that's what makes these moments so unforgettable. Not because they prove that animals think like us, but because they remind us how much we still have to learn about minds that evolved alongside ours, yet remain fundamentally different. So, why do wild animals ask humans for help? The truth is, they may not, at least not in the way we imagine. A whale doesn't have to understand kindness. An elephant doesn't have to believe humans are good. A dolphin doesn't need to know what compassion is. All it takes is one extraordinary moment, a moment when every familiar survival strategy has failed, when instinct no longer has the right answer, and the only remaining option is something completely unexpected. Approach the very creature you've spent your entire life avoiding. That's what makes these stories so powerful. Not because they prove that animals think like humans, but because they reveal just how flexible some minds can be. Millions of years of evolution taught wild animals to fear us, yet under the rarest circumstances, a few individuals seem capable of overriding that fear, not out of friendship, not out of affection, but because survival sometimes demands a decision that instinct alone can't make. Perhaps that's the real lesson. Intelligence isn't just about solving problems, it's about knowing when the old rules no longer work. And maybe that's why the same animals appear again and again in these stories. The ones with the longest memories, the strongest social bonds, the most adaptable minds. We may never know what a whale was thinking beneath the surface, or why an injured elephant chose to walk toward a rescue vehicle instead of away from it. Those answers may remain hidden. Inside minds we'll never fully understand. But one thing is certain. Every time one of these rare encounters happens, it reminds us that the line separating humans from the rest of the animal kingdom isn't as simple as we once believed. Sometimes, in the middle of fear, in the middle of pain, and against every instinct shaped by evolution, a wild animal makes one impossible choice. It gives the most dangerous species on Earth one chance